This video is brought to you by contributions to patreon.com/Henry Kathman from viewers like you. Thank you.
You've got to go and dig those holes with broken hands and withered souls, emancipated from all you know.
There is no lake at Camp Green Lake. There once was a very large lake here, the largest lake in Texas. That was over 100 years ago. Now it is just a dry, flat wasteland.
These are the opening lines of Louis Sachar's 1998 novel, Holes, which would later be adapted into a film in 2003, with Andrew Davis as director and Sachar writing the screenplay. For the past 2 decades, both the film and the book hold a great degree of esteem with children of the early 2000s. Some of you might have read it for school, others might have watched it on DVD, and some of you will have your brain chemistry rewired just by hearing this song.
Holes is one of the rare examples of a book-to-film adaptation that is held in equal regard as its source material. There is very little of Sachar's work that ends up being lost in the transition from book to film. This, coupled with the stellar acting and filmmaking on display, has caused some people to hold both the film and book versions in extremely high regard. So beloved that those who first encountered it have somewhat forgotten the ways that Sachar describes the world of the early 2000s, as well as our world over 20 years later.
Wake up in the morning before the sun, keep digging that hole till the day is done.
The reader is probably asking, why would anyone go to Camp Green Lake?
This question, posed at the start of the second chapter, is the first overt invitation for young readers to think on the conditions these characters find themselves in. Other young adult novels of the era were certainly not strangers to putting their child protagonist in precarious survival situations like Gary Paulson's Hatchet, nor were they unfamiliar with depicting the injustices we inflict upon children in stories like Matilda by Roald Dahl or Speak by Laurie Halsey Anderson. But through Sachar's blunt to the point of clinical narration, the realities of Camp Green Lake are made all the more apparent to our protagonist, Stanley Yelnats IV.
Stanley Yelnats was given a choice. The judge said, "You may go to jail, or you may go to Camp Green Lake." Stanley was from a poor family. He had never been to camp before.
But unlike the adventurous summer camps seen in books like Percy Jackson or Lumberjanes, Sachar's inspiration for Holes came from his experiences living in Texas. At the time I began the book, we had just returned from the relative coolness of a vacation in Maine to the Texas summer. Anyone who has ever tried to do yard work in Texas in July can easily imagine hell to be a place where you are required to dig a hole 5 feet deep and 5 feet across day after day under the brutal Texas sun. Hell is quite an apt comparison to the conditions Stanley encounters at Camp Green Lake, a fact that was effectively illustrated in the opening scene of the 2003 film. As the campers' singing echoes into the desert, we see a young boy nicknamed Barfbag digging into the dried lake bed now littered with a sea of holes, 5 foot wide, 5 foot deep. Holes that are said to turn boys like Barfbag into good boys, only for those same boys to find themselves drowning in this arid sea of sweat, dirt, and defeat. It is a scene so bleak, so unforgiving, that when Barfbag sees a rattlesnake staring at him from beyond his hole, the audience almost immediately understands why he takes off his shoes, walks over to the snake, and warily steps on it so it may bite him. Anything, even the risk of a painful death, is worth it if it can take these children away from Camp Green Lake. In real life, there is a place called Green Lake located on the eastern coast of Texas in Calhoun County. By all accounts, it's a fairly nice place, where the average temperature peaks at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, there are 40 inches of annual rainfall, and waters take up approximately 10,000 acres. Though, based on fan speculation and research conducted by Luke Schumann, the fictional Camp Green Lake of the novel is most likely located somewhere east of the New Mexico border, south of Llano Estacado, west of Odessa, and deep in the heart of the Chihuahuan Desert. Here, the weather is far less kind, as the desert resides in the rain shadow of the Sierra Madres mountain ranges, causing much of the area to see around 6 to 16 inches of rain each year. This has resulted in the area achieving the record for the hottest recorded temperature in Texas history on June 28, 1994, with a recorded low of 120 degrees Fahrenheit that day, a feat that has only been rivaled by Seymour, Texas on August 12, 1936. This hellish environment was one element that the 2003 film captured with an unintended accuracy, as cast and crew in Ridgecrest, California had to contend with 120-degree filming days, 50-mile-per-hour dust tornadoes, and power whiteouts from the massive piles of dust that would blow onto the set. To give credit to people like location manager Mark Benton Johnson and stunt coordinator Alex Daniels, there was a great degree of care being placed to make sure that they maintained a safe environment for the child actors, to the point where they sacrificed certain elements of Sacker's novel for the sake of the well-being of these kids. One famous change that was made for the film was Stanley's physique. As Sacker describes,
On his last day of school, his math teacher, Mrs. Bell, taught ratios. As an example, she chose the heaviest kid in the class and the lightest kid in the class and had them weigh themselves. Stanley weighed 3 times as much as the other boy. Mrs. Bell wrote the ratio on the board, 3 to 1, unaware of how much embarrassment she had caused both of them.
Over the course of Stanley's first month at Camp Green Lake, Sacker describes how Stanley had already lost 5 pounds, and while it's ambiguous how much weight he loses over the course of his 5-month imprisonment, it's notable that it's never described as an affirming development, but as a testament to the harshness found at this camp.
While many are understandably disappointed in this element of the story being removed from the adaptation, it would have been both unreasonable and dangerous to ask a 16-year-old Shia LaBeouf to undergo the physical intensive health changes, as well as the possible health risk that would have been required in order to make this part of the adaptation convincing. Doing so would have also run the risk of this film's production plunging into the real-life horrors found in real-life camps designed to cause children to lose weight.
Derogatorily known as fat camps, the most famous and longest-running of these weight loss camps was Camp Shane, a family-operated camp that started operation in 1968. At their peak, they were operating 4 different locations in Arizona, California, Georgia, and New York, were heavily featured by celebrities like Oprah, and had families paying up to $6,400 to send their children to Camp Shane for 9 weeks. Under the owner, David Ettenberg, these camps garnered a legacy as one of the best places in the world at combating childhood obesity. But this legacy overshadowed the harmful practices observed in making these camps as profitable as they were, from multiple tax violations, failure to achieve proper operating licenses, to the more severe allegations of abuse and mistreatment being done to their young campers. The final of these occurred on July 10, 2021. After one of the camp's many soccer goal posts had collapsed and landed on an 8-year-old camper. The resulting injury left the girl hospitalized with a fractured skull. There's much that was shocking about this story. Firstly, the severity of the child's injuries. Second, in how this incident occurred during an investigation by the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood after a complaint was sent to the state's child abuse hotline 2 days prior. Third being the resulting investigation finding that the camp was operating without a license and had been severely understaffed, as well as the camp's final closure 3 days after this injury. Though what made this incident most notable to me was the way that it paralleled a particularly harrowing scene in Sacker's book. In Chapter 17, Stanley and the other boys from his tent witnessed the camp's warden jabbing one of the campers with a pitchfork as punishment for leaving to go to the bathroom.
The pitchfork left 3 holes in the front of his shirt and 3 tiny spots of blood. "You're giving these boys too much water," the warden told Mr. Pendanski.
Following this encounter, Stanley and the rest of the boys are forced to dig in the same hole together, resulting in another kid striking Stanley in the side of the head with a shovel. It's unclear if this was done as a result of the campers' annoyance with Stanley, or whether it's a response to the previously observed violence brought about by the warden. Whatever the case, once he woke up from the hit,
Stanley brought his fingers up the side of his neck. He felt his wet blood and a pretty big gash just below his ear.
While this moment would only appear as a deleted scene in the film's DVD, it has continued to stick with me as perhaps the most callous embodiment of the hell found at Camp Green Lake.
Mr. Sir made a bandage out of a piece of his sack of sunflower seeds and taped it over Stanley's wound. Then he told him to get back to work. "It isn't nap time."
While the hellish conditions of the setting are effectively communicated, perhaps Sacker's most damning indictment against Camp Green Lake can be found in the children
that are forced to work there,
especially the campers at Tent D.
Take a bad boy, make him dig 5 feet. The dirt and these shovels will give us a beat. Okay, you found something never found before. If not, we'll just have to dig some more.
One quality that Sacker often gets praised for as a writer is his ability to create distinct characters in even the briefest of moments in a story. This is what partially gave Sacker his initial success as the author of the Wayside book series, with a cast of eccentric students that included a girl that drove a motorcycle to school every day, a boy that could only read when upside down, or a very small girl that wore big coats and was always asleep in class.
Sacker chooses to similarly use characterization as in the Wayside series, though where Wayside would do so for humor's sake, he uses it in holes in order to bring out the humanity of the campers of Camp Green Lake, though you wouldn't know it at first.
Even our protagonist Stanley is given this treatment through his aforementioned struggles with fat phobia, as well as the circumstances that got him sent to camp. As the earlier quote laid out, Stanley came from a poor family that could not afford a decent lawyer to defend him when he was accused of stealing a pair of priceless shoes from a homeless shelter. Like most other defendants in the juvenile justice system, Stanley greatly underestimated the potential consequences that the courts can inflict upon him. Instead, he naively thought that if he told the police and judge the truth, that the shoes seemingly fell out of the sky and hit him in the head when he was walking home from school, the truth would set him free. Though, like other juveniles, this truth was seen as a confession, causing Stanley to join the disproportionately large number of children who confessed to crimes that they did not commit, and likewise joining the other campers at Camp Green Lake. When Stanley first meets the other boys of Tent D, they all seem somewhat indistinguishable from one another. All covered in dirt and mud, wearing identical orange jumpsuits, refusing to go by their real names, and behaving with a lot of hostility towards Stanley. Tent D's de facto leader is a kid named X-Ray. He demonstrates his ability to see through people when he later coerces Stanley into giving him a gold tube that Stanley found on his first day, just to get some time off digging. Squid is similarly hostile, being arrested for beating up a police officer who confiscated a beer bottle for him. He often taunts Stanley for writing letters to his family, declaring that they were glad to be rid of him. Magnet gets his name from his ability to easily steal items off of people, which he puts to use to steal TVs, fax machines, and later some sunflower seeds from the camp counselors. Zigzag appears to be the most violent of the boys, being the aforementioned camper that delivered a shovel blow to Stanley's head, but also being spurred easily into fighting others when commanded. The camper that was jabbed with the pitchfork goes by Armpit, who is perhaps the closest of Camp D that acts as comic relief, partially owing to Byron Cotton's charismatic performance, but also the ways his name evokes the sort of gross-out humor that was prolific in the 90s and early 2000s. And of the kids in Tent D, he is the most insistent that he is called Armpit over his real name. Then there is Zero, a quiet camper that is called this because
there's nothing going on in his stupid little head.
Like the cast of Sacker's Wayside series, the campers of Tent D appear strange and maybe a little off-putting, to the point where certain characters like X-Ray, Squid, or Zigzag come off like antagonists that Stanley will have to overcome. However, like the dirt of Camp Green Lake, each of the campers Stanley meets displays a certain level of complexity hiding beneath their hostile surfaces. As Stanley gets to know each camper's story and birth names, he and the reader manage to dig up a better understanding of these children and the forces that led each of them to Camp Green Lake. X-Ray Rex can be manipulative, but when Stanley almost gets into a fight with another camper, he puts those people skills to good use to help de-escalate the situation. Alan Squid does act unfeeling towards others, though this front goes away one night when Stanley is awoken by the sounds of Squid crying, implying that he only told Stanley his family was better off without him because that's what he was told by his own. For Jose Magnet, it's true that he's quite skilled at stealing stuff, but he is also shown to have a great love for animals. The reason he got sent to Camp Green Lake was because he was trying to rescue some dogs from a puppy mill that was going to sell them for $1,000 each. He would have succeeded too if his pockets didn't start to bark. While Ricky Zigzag does have violent tendencies and is often referred to by other campers as crazy, the book makes it clear that this is the result of paranoia stemming from an unspecified mental condition that is currently being left untreated by the camp. This neglect is further demonstrated by Brian Twitch, a camper who arrives after Stanley and is named after the tics that can be emblematic of stereotypic movement disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or different kinds of stimming displayed by people on the autism spectrum. Even Theodore Armpit Thomas Johnson, a character that often acts jovial and detached around others, is masking a deeper pain. In truth, the reason Armpit got his nickname doesn't stem from a joke about body odor. It occurred because Armpit got stung by a scorpion when he first got to camp, an injury whose pain index has been compared to being struck by a bolt of lightning. When he told the counselors about the pain occurring when the venom reached his armpits, he was promptly ignored and sent back to dig. This injury is not just notable as another instance of Camp Green Lake's negligence, it's also worth pointing out in the context that race plays in this story.
Stanley, Zigzag, Twitch, and Squid are white. Magnet is Latino, and Zero, Ray, and Armpit are black. I mention this because the camp's response to Armpit's injury is emblematic of the long history of doctors routinely ignoring the pain of people of color and improperly addressing health problems due to the erroneous belief that people of color have a higher pain tolerance than white people.
Though the character Stanley comes to understand the most is Zero, real name Hector, who is similarly the victim of the implicit bias displayed by the counselors of Camp Green Lake. While some have interpreted Hector's nonverbal tendencies as a sign that he is neurodivergent, it is revealed that Hector's biggest area of struggle stems from him and his mother being homeless, which has resulted in him not having a consistent education and likewise being unable to read. This revelation doesn't just serve as an impetus for Stanley later teaching Hector how to read. It's reflective of the disproportionately higher levels of illiteracy being found in African American children due to the education system's continual failure to provide equitable funding and learning opportunities for students of all ethnicities. All of this demonstrates that for as dangerous and directionless the other children of Camp Green Lake are initially made out to be, neither they nor the harsh wilderness are what Stanley needs to fear the most. In fact, it is the people who claim to be saving these boys that embody the most toxic corruption that stews in the earth of Camp Green Lake.
Your hands may blister, your muscles sore. You wanna break, knock on the warden's door.
As a novel primarily targeted to children, people tend to classify Holes into categories that you would commonly find at the Scholastics book fair. Adventure story, mystery, coming of age, stuff like that. But Christine Mullengard, a professor at the University of Hawaii, most accurately analyzed the story through the lens of the American Western, through her essay, Haunting and History in Louis Sachar's Holes, where she points out,
no other genre in film or literature depends as much on specific landscapes as the Western does. The Western genre in film and fiction activates the mountains, deserts, rivers, lakes, prairies, buttes, and plateaus of the U.S. West as gendered and cultural spaces for national discourses about masculinity and hardness, bravery and perseverance.
Of the characters in Holes, the three that best embody this idea of the American West as a gendered and cultural space are the three main adults that Stanley interacts with at Camp Green Lake: the counselors Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendanski, and the mysterious Warden Walker. Each of them initially act as symbols for authority, order, and stability amongst the chaotic dangers found in the American West. The classic sheriff, who has been tasked with bringing order and civilization to this untamed land, taking these criminal campers and molding them into ideal productive citizens. Though it would be a mistake to look at these people and the Western lawmen they emulate in such a manner. As Mullengard explains,
in traditional Westerns, the landscape is represented as white, masculine space that excludes women and minorities from anything resembling narrative subject positions in the history of the West.
Indeed, when you dig a little deeper into these three, each of them comes to embody the misogyny, racism, and violence that has been continually ignored in uncritical accounts of this history. Take Camp Green Lake's head counselor/overseer, Mr. Sir. Here is a man that embodies the classic machismo of the American cowboy. He's rugged, speaks with a firm gruffness, wears a 10-gallon hat, and carries a 6-shooter that he isn't afraid to use on the deadly yellow-spotted lizards that live around camp. If his common refrain of "this ain't no Girl Scouts camp" doesn't make it apparent enough, the fact that he has a masculine title in his name should demonstrate how Mr. Sir is meant to embody the kind of masculinity that was codified by the American Western. Put Mr. Sir in a classic Western novel by Louis L'Amour or Zane Grey, and he would have been seen as a heroic character, if not made the protagonist that demonstrates hardiness, bravery, and perseverance. Though in both 1998 and now, this idea of the cowboy has been subsumed by revisionist Western stories like Blood Meridian, True Grit, and most recently Red Dead Redemptions 1 and 2. Stories where that archetype is portrayed as one that is out of touch, of no use, and on its way out even back then. So when you place that kind of a guy in the modern day, we can see how Mr. Sir is already losing his ability to keep those cowboy traits. He can't use his gun to solve problems with the kids, he had given up smoking and shifted to sunflower seeds, and he constantly hides the fact that his real name is Marion. Though the moment that was most insulting to this image was when the warden slashed his face with nail polish mixed with rattlesnake venom. Not only did Stanley see that macho veneer shed as he writhed on the ground in pain, Mr. Sir's face would be permanently marked with a scar that embodies the biggest insult to the classic cowboy: being forced to take orders from a woman. All of this contextualizes the ways that Mr. Sir tries to use his authority in camp. While not as explicitly violent as other characters, Mr. Sir will use his power and authority to punish anyone that challenges the cowboy image he has built up for himself. For him, the campers are not people, but are instead potential threats that must be monitored and harshly punished at all times, lest they make him lose more of those dwindling shreds of cowboy machismo. By comparison, the other counselor, Mr. Pendanski, appears nurturing and moderate next to Mr. Sir, to the point of being nicknamed Mom by the campers. When he first meets Stanley, Pendanski tells him how much he respects him, ensuring that just because they've done bad things, it doesn't make them bad kids. On the surface, Pendanski appears to be the best kind of person you could find at a place like Camp Green Lake, a guy that's giving back to his community and bringing order to the lives of these chaotic youths. Were you to ask Pendanski, that's probably how he would describe himself. As much as his attitude could be used to justify the mistreatment seen in a place like Camp Green Lake, the way Pendanski tries to fix these boys shows how past and present institutions that see themselves as societal goods are just as capable of perpetuating injustice and hindering progress. For as much as Pendanski sees himself as an enlightened, civilizing force of moderation, that moderation helps to mask the atrocities perpetuated by our existing systems. The kind of guy that Dr. King described in Letters from a Birmingham Jail as, quote, the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timeline for another man's freedom. Despite being nicknamed Mom, that paternalism is Pendanski's most defining trait. For all of Pendanski's claims to respect the campers, he continually fails to see them as people with their own identities and complexities. When campers adopt nicknames as a sign of personal identity, Pendanski continually addresses them by
the names that society will recognize them by when they return to become useful and hard-working members of society.
When campers like Magnet speak Spanish, despite living in lands that were basically Mexico up to 150 years ago, he will dismissively declare,
Oh, this is America. We speak English here.
Whenever any of the campers tries to explain the circumstances that led them to Camp Green Lake, he will refuse to acknowledge any of the systemic factors that may have brought them there and place all of the blame on the personal failings of each camper. If Pendanski actually respected the campers and wanted to prepare them to re-enter society, he would have been elated that Hector, the one kid he doesn't refer to by his real name, was learning how to read. But in reality, Mr. Pendanski acts as a clear embodiment of the kind of racism that defined American Western expansion. The kind of racism that saw white colonizers separate indigenous children from their homes, punish them for using the languages of their tribes, and refusing to call them by the names they preferred, all with the mantra of kill the Indian, save the man. Like the indigenous people or enslaved Africans of the Old West, these campers are not people to Mr. Pendanski. Instead, he sees them as unmolded, impressionable clay that he can sculpt to fit into his ideal of a model citizen. When he talks about the names that society will recognize the campers by, it's especially telling that he doesn't use words like happy, stable, or well-rounded. In his assimilationist mindset, the most important thing for these kids to become are useful and hardworking, traits that indicate that he is willing to have a person's individuality wiped away if it can cause someone to adhere to our world's existing power structures of white supremacist patriarchal capitalism. And when someone shows that they can't fit into the mold Pendanski has set for them, well, between him and Mr. Sir, Pendanski was the only one to ever fire a gun with the intention of instilling fear.
I said that's enough!
Of these adults, the one that perhaps best demonstrates the duplicitous dehumanization of Camp Green Lake is Warden Walker. Initially, she appears sweet, understanding and accommodating to the campers. She offers them extra water when they find something interesting. She calls them by their chosen nicknames, and she's even willing to not punish them when they steal Mr. Sir's sunflower seeds. But with a single utterance of the phrase, "Excuse me," the warden will show how she embodies the violent mindset that underpins the Western expansion of America. Where Mr. Sir uses his machismo and Pendanski his paternalism, the warden will be the first to use violence as a means to reinforce her control over the campers, her staff, and the land itself. In addition to the aforementioned pitchfork stabbings and snake venom nail polish, the warden displays her capacity for violence when Hector eventually runs away from the camp. Instead of prioritizing the safety of this child, she orders that guards be put on all water sources and that Hector's existence and records be destroyed so no one will come to look for him. When Stanley and Hector eventually find themselves in the nest of deadly yellow-spotted lizards, she is more than willing to stand there and watch the two die a slow, painful death if it means she can get what she wants. Because, like all colonizers, the warden displays an entitlement to the land of Camp Green Lake and the campers under her care. These campers are also not people in her eyes, but they are instead tools that are designed to extract as much value out of the land as possible. And if one of those tools runs away like Hector, Twitch arrives not too long after, demonstrating just how replaceable these children are to her. What makes this especially callous is how the value she is exploiting these children to gain was never hers to begin with. It turns out, despite the lies the warden shares about these children building character by digging these holes, the real motivation lies in the warden's desire to find the buried treasure of the Old West bandit kissing Kate Barlow. Despite the treasure actually belonging to Stanley's great-great-grandfather, she feels entitled to it because it was buried in Green Lake. And to quote the warden's grandfather, Trout Walker,
"The duck may swim on the lake, but my daddy owns the lake."
For the warden, getting the treasure is not just about the monetary value it provides. In fact, the book points out that the treasure is far less valuable than the money the warden must have spent building and maintaining Camp Green Lake for as long as she has. No, the real value stems from this idea that the Walker family used to have a sense of glory and wealth. In times past, the Walkers owned all of Green Lake when there was an actual lake there, and Trout Walker was able to get whatever he wanted. Now that the lake has dried up, that value has now been stolen from the Walker family. Just as Kate Barlow robbed banks, the land itself has taken that glory, power, and value that they feel entitled to.
In addition to being the most dangerous of the three, the warden best embodies this entitled philosophy emblematic of this romanticized version of the Old West. A philosophy that looked upon lands previously cultivated and maintained by indigenous people for centuries, and then thinking that it was just untamed land. A philosophy that sees the unpaid labor of kidnapped African people as a mercy. A philosophy that sees the pillaging and destruction of this environment as a God-given right. All of these philosophies are the same, and can dilute someone into thinking that if you take a bad boy and make him dig a hole in the hot sun, it will turn him into a good boy. This philosophy has taken many names over the years. Manifest Destiny, America First, the white man's burden, the free market. The names may shift with the times, and the persons that utter it. But perhaps the best descriptor of this philosophy
is one that the book provides.
You've got to go and dig those holes.
In addition to being a revisionist Western, another literary genre Holes adheres to is magical realism. For those unfamiliar, magical realism is a genre that mixes the fantastical and mundane, oftentimes using documentary-like speech to describe the supernatural, while cloaking the realities of the world in layers of metaphor and impossible imagery. While Holes is much more accessible than other genre staples like 100 Years of Solitude, The Holy Mountain, or Kentucky Route Zero, Sacker's writing incorporates elements of magical realism in order to grapple with the heady issues it discusses. The first of these can be found in some of the ways that the stories will sometimes jump away from Stanley Yelnats' The Fourth's time in Camp Green Lake and show the audience two other settings. One of these settings takes the audience to the Yelnats family's mother country of Latvia, where we learn of a curse that has supposedly haunted Stanley's family ever since the no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing Elya Yelnats failed to keep his promise to his old friend Madame Zeroni. In exchange for a pig Elya believed would help him win the hand of his love Myra Menke, Zeroni asked that he carry her up to the nearby mountain once the pig was grown up and he and Myra were together. But when Elya gave up on pursuing Myra, he emigrated to America and forgot his promise, causing the Yelnats family to suffer from bad luck from that day forward. Unlike the curses seen in other tales of magical realism, the Yelnats family curse isn't something that physically manifests. Instead, it is something that the Yelnats often use as a coping mechanism for the hardships they have to endure. From Stanley's dad continually struggle to make a successful invention, Elya's son having all of his money stolen by kissing Kate Barlow, to even Stanley's wrongful conviction. This curse can almost be seen as a representation of the ways that people born into less wealth are far less likely to gain generational wealth compared to the rich. Because the Yelnats family was never given an opportunity to improve their material conditions, Stanley wasn't able to afford proper legal defense that could have saved him from being sent to Camp Green Lake, which could have run the risk of further perpetuating this curse by dooming Stanley to the long-standing consequences of juvenile incarceration. As much as some would insist that residential juvenile corrections facilities like Camp Green Lake have the ability to turn bad boys into good boys, the data shows that this is a lie. According to a report by the Legislative Budget Board for the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, from 2015 to 2017, over 71% of juveniles released from local residential facilities were rearrested within the first 3 years of their release, a percentage that jumped to over 73% for state-run facilities. While Stanley was innocent of the crimes he had committed and would likely have a lower risk of this, the same can't be said for his fellow campers. Because for all of the good the workers at Camp Green Lake insist that they are doing for these bad boys, they never once provide these children with any of the tools or knowledge they would practically need in order to escape the circumstances that led them there. The fact that no one thought to help Hector learn how to read before Stanley offered to in exchange for helping him dig his holes, despite literacy consistently being a cited factor in future success for underprivileged people, proves that the people at Camp Green Lake are more than happy to perpetuate the hardships that mire their campers. What makes this hardship all the more tragic is the fact that the warden is also cursed in her own way. As repugnant her actions and motivations are throughout the story, Sacker makes a clear effort to point out that this was not something inherent to her character, but the result of generational trauma. It turns out, before Kate Barlow died, he told Trout Walker that he, his children, and his children's children could dig on the remnants of Green Lake and never find her treasure. While not intended as such, this was a curse placed on the Walker family, because for the next 100 years, Trout Walker would have his family spend every day digging holes in the desert looking for treasure. First his children, then his granddaughter the warden, spending every day, even Christmas, in the hot sun digging holes in the vain hope that it could recapture the lost past that they were never going to recover. But any sympathy that this could garner is immediately washed away by the realities of what the warden went on to do. She had every opportunity to let go of the past, let go of her grandfather's mad ambitions, let go of the violence that was inflicted on her as a child. She could have broken her family's curse by walking away from Green Lake and moving on with her life. But instead, she chose to perpetuate the violence that was inflicted on her. But now, on an industrial scale through the juvenile justice system that could spread this curse to countless young children. From this lens, the curses seen in Holes can be seen as a metaphor for the ways that the issues of our systems have the capacity to harm in ways that those who are affected can't fully see. Even when they see themselves as helpful and benign, such systems are able to do this because they have oftentimes failed to learn from the wrongdoings that have occurred in the past. The other setting we gain insight into throughout the story is Green Lake before it dried up in the 1890s. It was a time that saw the population of West Texas rapidly grow with large masses of European immigration, the United States successfully driving out both the Mexican government and the Lipan Apache tribes, and the early stages of the Great Migration. In the moments where we see the Green Lake that once was, the film version portrays it in a manner that evokes the sublime romanticism we associate with the Old West. In beholding the beauty and prosperity that was once here, you could almost understand why the warden might be so obsessed with reclaiming this vision of the past. Compared to the dry, modern hellscape Stanley finds himself in, Green Lake could almost be seen as utopian. Though, in learning the history of Green Lake, the audience is given continual reminders that this utopian vision of the past is not only fake, but is a cursed bedrock of violence that has been the foundation of the modern Camp Green Lake. While the audience gets to see this history firsthand, it is a history that Stanley never sees for himself. The most direct context Stanley ever has with this past moment in time actually occurs during his arrival in the movie, when he exchanges a look with a sullen African-American man walking with a donkey alongside the road. Neither the bus driver or the armed security guard seem to notice, for it seems that Stanley has encountered the ghost of Sam the Onion Man. Ghosts have a lot of prominence in magical realism, with stories like Beloved by Toni Morrison or The Devil's Backbone directed by Guillermo del Toro, oftentimes being symbolic of the victims to the unjust systems that curse the world. The titular Beloved is believed to be the spirit of the daughter the protagonist killed to escape slavery. The ghost in The Devil's Backbone is a child that was murdered by a fascist sympathizer amidst the Spanish Civil War. And the only ghost that appears in Holes is Sam, who we learn was lynched by a mob led by Trout Walker as punishment for kissing Kate Barlow. In all examples, this supernatural presence demonstrates that just as the campers and counselors often bury their true selves to others, we also tend to collectively bury the truth of our past when it contradicts the image we created for ourselves. As stated by Mollengard,
ghosts have a pressing historical agenda to remind the living of what has been concealed, and to bring their attention to troublesome, sometimes gruesome, events from the past.
It's interesting that of all the people that appear to Sam from the past, Sam is the only one seen despite him being the person Stanley learns the least about. Mollengard's essay poses the interesting question of why Stanley never sees any other ghost. Why not show Trout Walker desperately searching amongst the holes? Why not show Kissing Kate's gang riding along the dried lake's horizon? Why not have Stanley directly contend with Madame Zeroni's angered spirit, if not to just get more screen time with eternal icon Eartha Kitt? Even though the film never presents a definitive answer to this question, that lack of knowledge about Sam might be the key to his ghost's presence. Unlike the other characters previously mentioned, there is no one around to remember Sam. Despite his death being the impetus for Kate Barlow to pursue the life of an outlaw, that revenge overshadowed any attempt to share Sam's story with the world. Though even if Kate did try to tell that story, it is doubtful that anyone in Green Lake would care to know about a poor onion farmer who broke the laws against miscegenation. People like Trout Walker get to be remembered as great men of history. People like Kate Barlow get to be remembered as a legend of the Old West. People like Sam, who have been wronged by the unjust systems of his day, who get pushed to the margins of society and are punished for going against the desires of great men like Trout Walker, those are people who are erased by history and haunt our present because we have failed to fully atone for the sins of the past. And for that great wrong inflicted upon Sam and Kate, this pure embodiment of the racism, misogyny, and violence that lies at the heart of the Old West, a curse would be put on Green Lake. As the novel plainly says,
That all happened 110 years ago. Since then, not one drop of rain has fallen on Green Lake. You make the decision. Whom did God punish?
Today, it seems as though we are constantly suffering from an unknown curse from our past. Our modern system of law enforcement is built off the backs of slave patrols and tough-on-crime politicians more interested in punishment than rehabilitation. Our prison system, from a loophole in the 13th Amendment allowing for slave labor to persist for the incarcerated. The juvenile justice system, from decades-long failures to properly address disparities in education and mental health care. The abusive and sometimes deadly environments of America's thousands of troubled teens camps, from a lack of regulation and enforcement placed on child care and the long-standing belief that parents get to own their children. Our increasingly polarized political sphere, from a denial of history in favor of an idealized past. Even the increasingly hostile environment can be traced partially to the ways we have ignored practices done for centuries by indigenous people to help maintain balance in our climate. Like Ilya Yelnats and the people of Camp Green Lake, the curses we have inflicted upon ourselves continue to make our lives harder to live each day because we have failed to take the steps we need to break them. Whether that failure is born of ignorance or refusal, when the book asks, whom did God punish? All I need to do is look at this world of inequality and injustice to know the answer. The only thing I don't know is whether or not such a curse can be broken.
Despite the novel and film often being remembered as being dark by many of those who read it as children, Sacker has also been praised for how he manages to end this story in such a hopeful, cohesive way. It all begins when Hector begins to speak up for himself after being regarded as a thoughtless tool by people like the Warden and Mr. Pendanski. Thanks to the knowledge gained through Stanley's teaching, Hector is no longer willing to accept the world that lays before him. No longer is his shovel just a mechanism for mindless digging, but a means for Hector to finally push back against the oppressive systems in his life, which he first does by giving Mr. Pendanski the response bigots like him all deserve. When it's clear that the adults of Camp Green Lake aren't going to help Hector after he runs away, Stanley takes it upon himself to try to find him. When the two reunite, they take refuge on the nearby mountain of God's Thumb, navigating harsh desert, jagged cliffs, and deadly thirst. It could have been easy for Stanley to remain complacent and let Hector become forgotten like Sam. But that act of caring for another person in the face of apathetic systems ultimately sets both of them free. As Stanley carried Hector up to the peak of God's Thumb, the novel describes the feeling of weight being lifted off of Stanley's shoulders, and the two experiencing great luck. This luck seems like a mere coincidence until Hector reveals that he is the descendant of Madame Zeroni. Neither of the boys fully realize it, but Stanley has managed to break the Yelnat family curse, which gives them the confidence they need to return to Camp Green Lake, find Kate Barlow's treasure, and ultimately bring the Warden to justice. Part of what makes this such a hopeful ending is how it reminds us that so much of the hardships and misery found in the world can be combated by the radical act of caring. For as inevitable and futile oppressive systems can feel, we have seen time and time again that those systems crumble when enough people reject apathy and show their support and love for other people. Though in addition to this mutual understanding, Hector and Stanley are also able to succeed and survive by trying to understand the world around them. They never directly learned the truth about the history of Green Lake, but they nevertheless benefit from the wisdom the ghost of the past bring. First in finding Kate Barlow's tube of lipstick leading Stanley to the treasure, the remnants of Sam's boat sheltering Zero, Kate's preserved peaches and Sam's onions stopping the two from starving, the onions being the main repellent for the yellow-spotted lizards, and the two ultimately being lifted out of poverty thanks to the Yelnats family lost treasure. As Kristen Mollengard essay concludes,
Hole's central theme is the need to finish unfinished business from the past in order to bring closure to its haunting intrusion in the present.
We live in a world where oftentimes the failures of our history continue to curse us. Though choosing to ignore those failures or burying them doesn't make those failures go away. If anything, it makes their hauntings more damaging in the long run. In the centuries-long drought of empathy and critical thought, it falls on us to break these curses of oppression. But in order to do so, we must look on our past and seemingly empty surfaces of our history, our systems, and our fellow humans. If enough of us can do that together, we too may be able to bring the world's wardens to justice and bring the rain back to our own Camp Green Lakes.
Okay, I think they stopped mowing the lawn outside. Hey everybody, before I end this video, there are two things that I would like to mention. First, I would like to shout out Kristen Mollengard's essay, Haunting and History in Louis Sachar's Holes. In all of the research that I do for these videos, rarely do I encounter a piece of academic writing that blows my mind as much as this paper. While not the basis for this video, Mollengard's writing was quite helpful in shaping my own conclusions for it, and it would be a disservice for me to not acknowledge her writing. You can find links to this essay alongside all of the other citations in the bibliography below, but if you have a hard time reading through academic writing like this, I have something for you on my Patreon. For just $1, there is a special video where I read through Mollengard's essay and discuss how it influenced the video, what parts I was inspired by, what areas of Mollengard's writing I find myself disagreeing with, and some of my other general thoughts on this piece. If you've ever wanted insight into my research process or want to hear another perspective on this story, head over to patreon.com/Henry Kathman, which is the best way that you can financially support all the things I make on the internet. I don't really do a good job of plugging stuff like this, but it feels important to do so here because of my second item. As of the writing in July of 2025 and this recording on October 13th, 2025, large portions of Texas have been still devastated by the flooding that swept the region from July 4th to July 7th of this year. Right now, there have been 135 confirmed casualties. There are 2 people that are still considered missing as of September 25th, and thousands of people have been left without homes in what has been one of the deadliest floods America has seen in the 21st century. Of the flood's victims, at least 27 of them were staff and campers at Camp Mystic, an all-girls summer camp along the Guadalupe River. Given the subject matter of this video, it didn't feel right to discuss the injustices found in the United States without mentioning the ways that our current government has worsened such disasters by defunding the National Weather Services, failing to address the climate crisis that will make such disasters more commonplace, and perpetuating baseless conspiracy theories instead of addressing these problems head on. Like the boys of Camp Green Lake, we can't rely on someone else to come save us. We have to help each other. In the spirit of this lesson, I want to use this video to help raise money for the Spirit of Giving, an organization dedicated to raising money and providing assistance for Texas communities affected by natural disasters and other tragedies. All of the ad revenue from this video is going to be donated to this charity, but as an extra challenge, I'm going to be raising additional money by continuing to dig a hole. From the day this video is published to the end of October, If you make a donation to the Spirit of Giving and send a receipt to this email address, every $10 donated is going to equal another half hour that I'm going to be digging a hole in the Indiana sun. So $20 is an hour of digging, 50 is 2.5 hours, 100 is 5 extra hours, and so on and so forth. Back when I filmed this video in September, I spent maybe about an hour digging that hole, so if you would like to see how deep I can go, or would like to see me suffer once again by my own ambitious ideas, just head over to spiritofgiving/donate or follow the links in the description. I hope we can raise some money for a good cause, but until then, thank you for watching. Best wishes.